Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Every industry has its unique challenges and opportunities in delivering great customer experience. Today we're going to talk about customer experience in retail. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Erica James, Global Head of Retail Practice at Medallia. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Yeah, looking forward to talking with you. So why don't we start by give us a little background on yourself and as well as what you do at Medallia.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting background. I actually started out my career post undergrad in public health. Very different from where I am today in
Yeah.
retail and customer experience. But interestingly enough, I had an opportunity through some real strong mentorship and some opportunistic moments to find myself in a role focused on consumer insights and market research in that space. Um, that led me to thinking, okay, let's try out potentially marketing as a next play. Went to Thunderbird School of Global Management to get my MBA. And after an internship in brand management that summer with Nestle, I realized, there's an element of marketing and branding that I really like, and it isn't necessarily the colors that you're putting on packaging or the words that you're using, but it's more the feeling that someone gets when they interact with a brand, right? Like operationally, when they engage with a brand, what do they feel? Um, how do they feel when they've left that experience, if you will? And so that insight, coupled with someone sharing Medallia with me, again, also kind of an opportunistic share, I found my way to Silicon Valley and have been with Medallia. It'll be 8 years pretty soon.
Nice. Well, yeah, I share a little bit of that marketing to, let's call it marketing to CX track as well. So I think
Mhm.
that's I think that's a natural one to kind of nothing against marketing, nothing against
No,
branding,
not at
of
all.
course, but it's a way of kind of peeling back the onion a little to get into that what you mentioned as the experience. So, which actually is a nice segue to kind of talk about what you're focused on now and
Sure.
in the retail industry. And so let's talk about some of those unique challenges in that industry. What do you see as what unique challenges are being posed in delivering great customer experience to customers in retail?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I spent around 7 years working with customers day in and day out in retail, and so hearing from them directly what was on their mind. Now the role that I'm in, I'm actually being kind of sourced in aggregate topics and themes that all of our retail customers are asking to get some thought leadership on, some guidance on, and dialogue with their peers around. And I think there's kind of three that seem to rise to the top. I think that while omnichannel was a thing pre-pandemic, the pandemic accelerated this idea of needing to maneuver cross-channel interactions in a way that you do leave your customer with the same consistent brand experience, even though you're realizing it differently, right? Whether that be curbside pickup, same day delivery to home, or an experience in the store, it feels like the intention is there to deliver that smoothly, but some of the building blocks and the operation that sits behind delivering those cross channel interactions is still a bit delayed. um, and I think, breaking that down a bit further into the second theme that I'm hearing is digital, right, has needed to play a bigger role than it ever has before. I won't. I will say digital transformation, but then I'll leave it there. I know that term is overused. But the reason I bring it up as a challenge in retail is digital is a big learning experience, not just for the organization, right? How are we going to deliver digital, touchless, contactless experiences? But it's a new frontier for employees, particularly those ones at the front line,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this, Greg, but going into, let's say, a physical retail location, having to engage with some new type of tech software that's in the store, whether that be a kiosk, a new way of checking out, or using an iPad to place your order, there's nothing more frustrating when you feel like that employee also doesn't understand,
Right.
right?
Right.
How to use that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's unfortunate because again, I think that, those employees understand that that's the new operating rhythm, but without the proper training, um, that good intention of providing a frictionless experience via some type of a digital medium falls down. And then everyone gets frustrated, both the employee and the customer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, no, please.
On that last front, I mean, I think the third thing that to me, cross-channel interactions, digital then really still proving to be sticky and an area of friction for many. You've got this then employee at the end of all this, right? We're asking them to put themselves, in the middle of the pandemic in danger, right? Potentially from a public health standpoint. You're asking them to, in many cases on a dime, do things that they've been doing via checklist for many years completely differently with no resources or training. Um, and while I do feel like some brands do this uniquely well, I think sometimes we forget to recognize those folks at the front line, checking people out at Walmart or helping people down the aisles at CVS. They have long days, they're dealing with a lot of new. Um, it's really important to make sure that we're rewarding them and recognizing them for what they're delivering.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to get into that, the employee experience, customer experience
Mhm.
thread in a minute here. But one thing before we get there, though, um, I think a lot of, particularly the first two things that you mentioned, but really all of it. Do you do you think it's been accelerated, or at least the need has been accelerated by by the pandemic, by lockdowns, by all those things? And I guess the follow up question to that would be: has success in retail customer experience, there's some obvious things that we probably can all agree on are success metrics, but has success and the way that it's been measured shifted as of late?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think the pandemic accelerated things. Although, what was interesting is in thinking about a few brands in particular, Starbucks being one of them. Starbucks at the end of 2019 was actually looking to start to shift some of their physical locations from being full cafes, right? So large environments with lots of people, something that's
Yeah.
not a no-go during pandemic world, to more quick pick up and go, mobile order based, because they were seeing a very large amount of their transactions coming from mobile orders. So they figured, let's decrease footprint and sort of make this the purpose of this physical location, mobile pickup. They were going there. And then January or February 2020 came and they just pushed the gas and really started to roll out many more locations, I think, than they had originally intended in that format because they knew that was where we needed to go, but they needed to go there more quickly, right?
Yeah.
Um, so some brands, I think, got there easier than others. Many are still in catch up mode.
I think the one phenomenon, and Starbucks, just personally and anecdotally, I was one of those people that, I don't know why, but I would always stand in line no matter what. I would never do mobile pickup, even though it's existed for a long time. The pandemic changed that, and I'm not going back. Like now that I've done it, I think it's a as a broader conversation, it's the pandemic has been going on long enough that we're as humans forming long-term habits, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's what, and I've seen this in many different realms, but I mean, to make it specific here, you do something for 3 days or even a week or two, and it's really easy to go back. I mean, think about New Year's resolutions. Like, it's really
Mhm.
easy to go back after a couple weeks and be like, oh man, I was going to exercise every morning, and now, whatever, life gets in the way. You start doing something the same way for 6 to 8 months. Those are
Mhm.
habits that are now long formed, and yeah, some people might go back, but these are things that are now ingrained in us. And I think, to your point there, consumers are, they've been forced in some cases to do things a certain way. Why would they go back? I can use my
Mhm.
example of Starbucks mobile ordering as one of them, but it just makes too much sense to do it, and I've done it too many times to even consider why, doing it again. So I do think it's not only accelerated, but consumers have done it long enough that there is no going back to normal in some of those cases.
Perfect kind of reaction there to sort of pivot back to success in retail today. I mean, I think there's some fundamentally things that will always stay the same. Um, but what you're saying, right, is you have a new need for convenience in a way
Yeah,
that perhaps you didn't have before. And so, if I step back from saying sort of defining success from a metric standpoint, but more of a feeling, something that I've seen based on some research that we've done at Medallia, as well as just sort of out there in the space, is um, there's this interesting pivot from you know, an experience in retail being easy as something that a customer wants and feels is good and defines as successful versus an experience that is convenient, right?
yeah,
Sure, we want to make things easy, and in many cases they do go hand in hand. But when we actually have looked at it closely, breaking down, actually looking at verbatims from customers in with the retail brands we work with, it's this convenience factor of I'm able to get something in the moment where I want it, how I want it. Maybe I had to have actually a couple more clicks to get there, back to that ease comment, whereas before that might have annoyed someone. But now it's more like I'll do more clicks, but I need you to give this in like to me in the way I absolutely need it in the at this point in time.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so, that I think is those that are winning are making it convenient. Obviously, those that continue to win do have consistency as sort of a word that is a mantra that they make sure that they're upholding. If you're experiencing something in the store, you should have that same feeling, for lack of a better word, online. Um, and, while I think that personalization is still incredibly important, I mean, it gets back to a little bit of what I was saying, like in this channel at this moment in time, how I want it. I think it does look a little bit different than before. I think definitely in retail, particularly in some of the segments where I work closely, apparel and luxury retail, personalization pre-pandemic was extremely high touch, definitely in person.
Yeah.
Um, Now, they're having to bring some of those high touch experiences online in an environment on the terms of the customer that they feel more comfortable with, versus what it looked like before. So I will never say personalization is not sort of a key element to success in retail. It absolutely is, but I think it looks a little bit different today.
And so to kind of talk more about measurement, so Net Promoter Score, NPS. There's other, CSAT. There's other types of measurements like that are still used. They serve a good role in measuring things, particularly I believe at least as a relative measure over time. But there's other things as far as real time measurement and other types of ways to meaningfully measure. What are some of the things that you're recommending to customers to think about, and how to think about measurement that go beyond the survey and kind of the after the fact questions?
I'll break that down in a couple things. I think all the metrics you mentioned, still definitely live on today and play a role. I would say one metric that continues to gain momentum based on what we were chatting about earlier is feedback on an employee as a part of a retail or any customer experience, really. Where there's an employee, brands are wanting to understand from a metric standpoint what the level of satisfaction was, or likelihood to recommend an individual to work with. So that certainly is different.
Yeah,
Um, in terms of stepping back from the survey itself as a means of measuring, I mean, we're definitely seeing folks in retail get on the bandwagon with leveraging social feedback in a way that they hadn't before. You probably know very well. I think that the hospitality brands were really the leaders in that space for quite
yeah,
some time, using social feedback, right, for their properties. We're seeing that now with more retailers bringing their business and their interactions with associates online. So trying to have, in some cases, creating a social metric score, in other ways, using things like um, sentiment analysis, right, over text, whether that be coming from a survey or whether that be coming from unsolicited feedback in the social space, to make a call of, okay, here's the number, right? Here's the NP, here's the LTR, or here's the OSAT. But what sits behind that number is this degree of sentiment on these words and these phrases. I feel like the analysis of text is exploding these days.
Yeah.
Brands that are going to win are going to get it right. Others are going to be overwhelmed with thousands of verbatims and not know how to do anything with them. But that's where you actually find the action oriented steps to make a change versus just a score.
One more thing specific to retail here. What are you seeing? What should retailers that want to be forward thinking be keeping in mind? What are you kind of seeing on the front lines of the industry, and really as an industry leader? What is Medallia recommending? What are you seeing?
First and foremost, there's been, and I would say this was happening before the pandemic began, but definitely since we've been in a slightly distant, more virtual world, I think that retailers who are going to win are going to look around and get creative and perhaps uncomfortable with some technology that might have been more forward thinking or used in another industry, let's say maybe financial services, but bringing that into retail. So, some of the things I'm thinking about specifically are using AI, machine learning, speech in some cases, even video in a way that traditionally I don't think retailers were using. For example, getting frontline employees video feedback from their customers to really help them understand how they could have improved an experience and feel like that feedback was meant for them individually. Like we're seeing people do that. And I think that embracing of your tech stack, but also making sure that you're using it, in the way that is the most impactful to the organization and to individuals therein is going to be, one differentiator. Um, I think too, and this is something that we've been seeing for the past couple of years, but I think more so important even now is, let's not say that the store is dead. The store is not dead. There's
Right,
reasons that
right,
people need to, right? I mean, you're still going to Starbucks to get your coffee. You're
right.
just having a different interaction, right? And so, while a couple years ago it was thinking about experiential, store environments where maybe you would have a lot of people in there. Well, maybe that looks a little bit different now, but still, it's what is the experience you're giving in the store versus on the phone versus on a website. Um, how to think through that and maximize your footprint where you have it because it still has a role. It's not obsolete.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and, I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but in retail, I just feel like those that are really going to continue to survive and thrive rather, will be the ones that look at their employees in a much different way than before. Not as people who file checklists and stack shelves, but as people who actually help innovate, as well as like be responsible for that ultimate like last mile experience.
yeah. And I think that's a great segue to kind of bring us back to this employee experience and customer experience relationship. And
Mhm.
I've written a bunch about it. I talk about it with anyone who will who will have the conversation with me, because I do think it's one of those things where not everything about them are directly causally related to one another, and yet there is such a direct relationship. And so that statement might have even been a paradox, but I think you know what I'm saying
Yeah.
is they're very much related. So in an industry like retail, you mentioned the frontline employees. I mean, from my perspective, that's that's definitely, I think it's a straightforward, the frontline employees are straightforward ones to measure if any of this is straightforward. I think the people behind the scenes that don't see themselves as part of the customer experience are also a big challenge. I mean,
Mhm.
if we're talking retail, I mean the people that are writing the code of the e-commerce platform, if they don't understand the customer that they're, selling products to, we've got a problem as well. So in other words,
Hmm.
a company wins when everybody can draw, even if it takes a little bit of a stretch. A company wins when everybody can draw a line between them and the customer in some
Hmm.
way. How do you, from where you sit and where you work with organizations, how do you help companies draw that line between CX and EX, knowing all of the, some of this stuff falls to HR, some of it falls to IT, some of it falls to marketing, to, sales, to, all of the above. Like, how do you work and, just kind of explain that to customers in a way that's meaningful?
It's a conversation that's happening more frequently for sure. And I think it's a conversation that some are open to hearing, very much so, and are ready to dig in. Others will give you the head nod. Yes, I get the connection, right?
Yeah.
But we'll deal with that later. I think,
Right.
um, I mean, here's what I'm seeing. Uh, I feel as though as we go into 2022, customer experience is ever more so now truly on the boardroom agenda like it hadn't been, because of, I think, the way we needed to pivot over the last 18, 20 months. I think what's interesting is that we're also seeing now others in the organization outside of HR realize, oh, we're asking employees to do a lot here. We're burning them out. Or we're not happy with what we're getting back from customers in terms of feedback, and it's related to employees and their training or their understanding or their empathy, whatever it may be. And so I think what's changing is that people outside of some of the traditional leadership silos or the silos of HR
Yeah.
and leaders beyond HR are realizing, oh, this is a thing. Like, we're hearing about employees and customer feedback even more so. We're hearing grumblings therein, the great resignation, people are leaving. Um, there's a connection here, and it's not just going to be solved by doing an annual engagement survey
Right.
and hoping that we figure it out. It's going to actually be a continuous pulse of employees throughout the year on things that matter to them, but things that are also directly linked to what you're asking them to do in service of the customer. And so I think that for the first time, leaders outside of HR are seeing, oh, this is something that is truly connected. And until we solve both, we're going to continue to see these friction points pop up in different areas where it's an employee has fallen down, is unhappy, is struggling, and as a direct result, customers at an individual level and then soon at aggregate are also going to be having those same experiences.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think, in a way, from the employee's perspective, it's actually a nice thing to think that they're getting support from different aspects, right? So, like,
Mhm.
um, HR gets a bad rap, and so, but
Yeah.
I'll use a generalization here that is not always true, but HR is often focused on compliance and risk mitigation, and those things are very, very important, but they're not the only thing, obviously, when dealing with employees. But for customer experience to all of a sudden value employees, whether they're frontline again, or somewhere in the middle or behind the scenes or whatever, um, all of a sudden you've got advocates for employees all over the organization, as opposed to, oh
Mhm.
man, I'm gonna just go complain to HR and hope that something happens. Now all of a sudden, employees are being valued in the way that they admittedly always should have been valued. But I see this as, in other words, as an opportunity, right?
Mhm.
And it's, I think measurement needs to provide a way to tie employee experience to customer experience, and ultimately, I mean, at the end of the day, it's sales and it's revenue and things like that there's got to be a line to it. But I think when an organization can do that, I think everybody's going to win.
Absolutely. And I mean, we even see it. We see some of our customers getting real granular, right? So leveraging pulse feedback of employees at different points in their journey. Let's just use onboarding as an example, right? So someone who's new. being able to understand how those new employees are experiencing onboarding and then match that experience data up with the customers that they've interacted with
Yeah. Oh,
to
nice.
see if
Yeah.
the customers are also feeling like, hey, using your name as an example, Greg seemed really confused, didn't really understand what's going on.
I
Well,
often am, for what it's worth.
I mean, that's if you start to see a pattern of that, you're not only going to get ahead of potentially like an attrition issue where people are
Yeah.
feeling uncomfortable in their jobs. They don't know. They're also seeing that customer feedback, by the way, and seeing that they're not hitting the mark. So you get ahead of attrition, and then of course you also get ahead of a broader issue where if you're continuing to onboard people in this way or do lack thereof onboarding, you're going to have this detractor experience from a customer point of view as well.
Well, one last question before we wrap up here,
Mhm.
to kind of go back to the very first thing we talked about in your experience as well. What I've seen, and this is particularly, I would say, in the smaller and mid-sized organizations, but I think it applies to many. This idea of branding, marketing, CX, all of this kind of gets conflated. And
Mhm.
I'd love to hear from your perspective on, especially, you've been in those roles and as distinct roles as well. How do you see the relationship as well as what makes them distinct? And how would you describe that to somebody?
That's an interesting one. And I'm sure it's one that everybody has their own sort of spin on, and spin we know is big in marketing. So um,
That's the marketing part of it. Yeah.
that's the marketing part of it, yes. So here's the way I would think about this. And I think that if you had asked me this question 7 or 8 years ago, I would have answered it differently. Um, an experience to me should essentially uphold the brand promise that you're marketing, right?
Yeah.
So a brand is the promise, the commitment, the thing that you're saying that you represent, that you stand for. Marketing, and again, feel free to disagree here. I'm sure others listening might have a different point of view, but marketing to me is the promotion of that brand message, right? The putting it out there in the right places to the right people at the right time. Where the rubber meets the road is the experience, right? That
Yeah.
someone actually has. You've told me you're committed to delivering this. You've told me in this channel or in this way that you're going to do that. But if I ultimately come into, let's say in a retail example, I come in to pick up my items curbside and the employees are saying, "Curbside? We don't have that at the store." I mean,
Right.
you've just lost me, right? The brand means nothing. The marketing is now just noise. The experience, the operationalization of the brand promise that you're marketing is that experience, right?
Yeah.
And it's not an easy one, I realize, to deliver on at scale, time and time again. But that I think is truly what matters.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I think it is. I think it is also important to make sure that everyone kind of focuses on, like, everyone should be concerned and want to make a great customer experience, but it's actually really, really important that branding people do really well on branding and marketing on
Mhm.
marketing and so on and so forth. And so I think when these things get kind of too related and you don't have distinct practices, again, it's like a marketing person needs to understand sales inside and out, and they should
Mhm.
understand operations of the company, and everyone should really understand everything to a degree of how a business runs. But if you don't have people really focused on these areas, you're gonna have something that sounds kind of nice, so a branding or marketing perspective, and you're gonna have an experience that maybe matches up, but you're not gonna have anything great, right? So I
Mhm.
like your definition.
Yeah. And just to quickly riff on that for a second, I think the chain that you just sort of described there, both the overlap that needs to happen between those teams, but also the mutually or the specific responsibilities therein, I think that's where in this space in an organization, brand, marketing, operations, and experience, there needs to be that feedback loop actually
Yeah.
around customer experience back to brand marketers and campaigns, right? Because they need to understand how is that actually is it being operationalized the way in which they intended? And if not, where's the disconnect, and kind of how do you jointly solve for that, even if you are in kind of unique roles.
Yeah, and do the customers even like the brand that's trying to be presented? When
Mhm.
the brand is experienced, is it actually what the customer wants as opposed to
Exactly.
what the agency came up with, or stuff like that. So yeah, no, that's great. Well, Erica, thanks so much for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. I'm not into tweeting, so find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to be. I'm happy to share kind of some of the stuff I'm working on at Medallia and elsewhere from that space. So I look forward to connecting with folks on that platform.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Erica James, Global Head of Retail Practice at Medallia, for joining the show. Thanks again for listening to The Agile World with Greg Kilstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.